address those issues, poverty and unemployment, and all the other kind of social problems that happened. And that was in June the 9th of 2012. And throughout the day, we had at those conferences an all-day thing like this, and people coming and going. We had over 100 people that came to that. Uh, we were all set to take off on dealing with issues of poverty and unemployment, uh, building what we hope ultimately would be what we call a poor people's survival program, because this is, of course, big city in the United States. But within days of our conference, um, a young black man was shot to death by the police downtown on Beale Street. Christian Freeman, 19 years old, and his case was, it's always bad when anybody gets shot to death by the police. But here was a young man who the police knew had a mental illness. He was paranoid schizophrenic, apparently, and the police claimed that he threatened them with a knife. They shot him to death. This was a few days after our conference. And then, about 2 weeks after that, and if you didn't get a copy up front, we have a complete list of what we call the body count. It's up there on the table at the top. The 14 people, at least the people whose names we know, there might be other people, these are the ones we know, that have been killed since 2012. And within days of Christian Freeman's death, Hernandez Dowdy was killed. He was killed on June 27th, 2012. And we'll go into some more details about some of these later. And then on July 3rd, about a week or so after Hernandez Dowdy was killed, Lorenzo Davis, when he died, he was not shot to death, but the police beat him to death. He died in police custody. So, to make a long story short, we saw all these rash of police killings happening. No one in the city was talking about this, no one was, complaining or saying anything about this. And we said, okay, we know we want to address the issues of poverty and unemployment, which of course, police brutality has kind of the front end of that, because who is it that gets into conflict in a big city like Memphis? Poor people. Poor people who may be unemployed, sometimes unfortunately may be driven maybe to commit a crime, or sometimes they just wind up being brutalized or shot just because they're poor. They may not be doing anything. So we said, well, something has to be done. Somebody has to start speaking out about this. So that's when we got the Black Autonomy Cop Watch going. And we were, by July of 2012, because Lorenzo Davis was killed in July 3rd. And after we did this, we began to realize that there were deaths that had preceded these deaths in 2012, that these were the latest ones, but that there were other ones, Jeremy McCraven, William Howers, Randy Green, Dwayne Bailey. They had preceded these other deaths that took place in June and July. And we said, wow, at that point, I think we were 6. We said, there's 6 people who have been killed here by the police in a 6-month, at that point, it was 6 months. What's going on here? Why isn't anybody saying anything about this? So we got Black Autonomy Cop Watch going at that point, which, temporarily took us away maybe from our agenda of dealing with poverty and unemployment, but I maintain is all related, just because the majority of these people, of these 14 people, with 2 exceptions, there were 2 white people on this who were killed by the police, and we know that. We know that it's not just black people, and it's not just people of color who are killed or are harassed by the police. There are white people who also are killed or harassed. And we're well aware of that. We never said that it's only black people. But in a city like this, because it is 65% black, the majority of people who do get harassed are black people. So, we got started with Black Autonomy Cop Watch, and within, I guess, that was in July, and then in August, there were 2 more deaths. The automobile crash that was caused by the cop who was speeding with no sirens, no flashing lights. And you heard the woman, the Shakita F. speak yesterday. It was her family members, her aunt, her cousin, who were killed in that car crash. And Michaela Ross, the young teenage girl who was killed, her father was severely injured. And will never be the same physically again. Was in the hospital for months, was in a coma for weeks. He didn't even know that his daughter was dead because he was in a coma. That's how bad the accident was. So they were killed in August. Then in September, 15-year-old Justin Thompson was shot to death by this off-duty police officer. And there's a really strong cover-up going on in that to this day. There's a real cover-up. They do not want to tell the truth about why that kid was killed. So he was killed in September. And then in December, a guy that they said was robbing a McDonald's he was shot and killed by the police. And then in January, we had within a week's time frame in January, 2 people were shot to death by the police within a 1-week period. I think one was January the 11th, and then less than a week later, January 17th. And the man that was killed on January the 11th, the police claimed they had come there to serve a warrant. He was supposed to be wanted for animal cruelty, okay? And I would think that might have been one of those no-knock warrants, because they claimed that when they came through the door of his home, that he pointed a gun at them. Now, if it's a no-knock warrant, and they made a big deal recently in this country about how people have the Second Amendment right to possess a gun, right? They do. So if it's a no-knock warrant, and you're in your house, and somebody barges in, you might point a gun at them too, if you have one, okay? Because you are entitled to have one under the Second Amendment. So he might have been startled by the police coming in if it was a no-knock warrant, and he may have pointed a gun at them, maybe. We don't have his story, because he's lying in the cemetery someplace now. But at any rate, they claimed he pointed a gun at them, and they shot him. This was for an animal cruelty warrant. Why did someone wind up dead? I'm not in favor of animal cruelty, don't get me wrong. I think it's wrong. I'm definitely opposed to it. But why did someone wind up shot to death over an animal cruelty warrant? Okay, but that's what happened. And then less than a week after he was killed, Stephen Askew was killed. He was 24 years old. All he did was fall asleep in his car, waiting for his girlfriend to come home so he could get into the apartment. That's the only thing he did. And by the way, he's the second person that was shot and killed by the police in the last year who had fallen asleep in his car. Earlier, May 8th of last year, Dwayne Bailey had fallen asleep in his car, not too far from here, over here in South Memphis. He was parked in a grocery store parking lot. He had fallen asleep in his car, and the police came over, I guess, knocked on his car window, startled him. If you're asleep, you're startled. And the police claimed that he tried to drive away. Well, maybe he did try to drive away. He didn't know who they were. So he might have thought maybe they were trying to rob him. So he drove away. The police claimed he dragged one of their officers with him in the process of that. Then they claimed he got out of the car, was in an argument with them, got back in the car. They were afraid the officer was going to be severely injured, so they shot him to death. Now, eyewitnesses told the family that there were at least 32 shots that were fired. My question is, if he's in a car speeding away, why not shoot the tires out? Because if you shoot the tires of the car out, he can't go anyplace, right? Why was this man killed if all he did was fall asleep in his car? Okay? And to my knowledge, there's not a law against it, unless, if you're asleep, you're not bothering anybody. He wasn't blocking an intersection. He was in a parking lot. Okay? So he was the second person who had been killed because he fell asleep in his car. Stephen Askew was a more recent one. And then, of course, this past Sunday, a gentleman by the name of Horace Whiting, 63 years old. He was shot and killed in front of his own house in this area of town, South Memphis. Now, I'm not too far away from my understanding. And because he's supposed to have had a shotgun. And again, under our laws, he has a Second Amendment right to have a gun. The police claimed that when he told them to put it down, that he threatened them, that he pointed the gun at them. But there were eyewitnesses. His neighbor said that's not what happened. His neighbor said that Horace Whiting never pointed the gun at anybody, never threatened the gun at anybody. You can have a gun. I mean, it's not against the law to have a gun in this country, right? But if you're black, you know, you may automatically be held under suspicion. But anyway, he was shot and killed this past Sunday. So, and he was the third person to be shot and killed by the police in a 2-month period. Now, this is not Chicago, folks. This is Memphis, Tennessee. You know, but that's the kind of rate that people are being killed. So at any rate, we had all these killings that were happening, the ones that were happening when Black Autonomy got started back, Black Autonomy Cop Watch got started. So we started because we felt like someone had to be speaking out and responding to it. Somebody had to say something. And we did some pickets at City Hall. We had a protest, the largest protest we had back in September. We marched from FedEx Forum down to City Hall Saturday, September the 8th. And we had several members of a guy who was beaten to death by the police, Lorenzo Davis. Many of the family members of his participated in that. After Justin Thompson was killed in September, we had another protest also through the tourist district in downtown. Now yesterday we deliberately did it differently because we never actually done one on a Saturday when the police were at work. And we wanted to do it yesterday because some people said, well, if you do it on a Saturday, you get more people. We said, well, maybe. Right. But we said we wanted to do it on a Friday because, first of all, the administrative offices were open yesterday. The chief of police was there, the prosecutor was there, and it was a whole different thing. Plus, that whole building is open. 201 Poplar was where everybody has to come to deal with all their criminal stuff, or so-called criminal stuff. So we knew it would be open. So we deliberately did it yesterday on a Friday. Plus, yesterday was March the 15th. That's the International Day of Action Against Police Brutality. But we had done things on Saturday. We wanted to be there on a weekday when we knew the police chief would be there, and the prosecutor, the DA, and all the other officials. So, that was a very good thing for us to do because we've never done it on a day when they were at work. So that was very good. It was a very powerful thing for us to be there. But I just want to give you some background as to how we came into existence and the fact that we are less than a year old. We have not been doing this for 5 years. You know, we're just out here doing the best we can. Renzo and I have been here about 2.5 years. Brother Brutality is another one of our stalwart members. He's from Memphis. He's been here all his life. He can tell you, you know, long details about the activist history here. But the fact of the matter of it is, in the last, 20, 25 years, there hasn't been a prolonged anti-police brutality movement here. It has been a prolonged one. You've had incidents that people may get upset about, but no one has really tried to build anything. So we basically have been chartering new territory here in terms of trying to build an anti-police brutality movement. It takes time, but we are working on it. So I did want to give you that history. There's a couple other things that I wanted to say also, just in general, about the body count. Excuse me. When you look at the Dolores Epps and Michaela Ross, who were killed in the car crash in August, Memphis has a really long history of people being killed, maybe not necessarily killed, but they have a lot of car crashes involving police officers here. They drive really recklessly here. A couple months ago, I can recall being up on Elvis Presley, getting ready to make a turn, and a police car was going to, if I hadn't seen him and gotten over, he'd have run into me. Unfortunately, I saw him. So they are reckless. There have been, a couple of hundred car crashes over here over the last couple of years?
Every year for the last 10 years, between 300 and 400 car crashes.
Just in Memphis alone, this area here.
Memphis Police Department.
Memphis Police Department. They are reckless drivers here, okay? And there are a number of people who actually are killed in the course of so-called chases. Police are chasing somebody. A number of people get killed around the country. There's even at least one law firm that we know of in Atlanta. That's what they specialize in. They represent the families of people who are killed in car crashes caused by law enforcement officers because there's so many of them around the country. That's just their specialty. So that's something to keep in mind, that there are those number of accidents that happen. I didn't bring the Memphis newspaper with me this morning, but I think one of the things that I mentioned yesterday was that you have a police force here who has a lot of problems. Yesterday, another police officer here was arrested for DUI. Now, this happens, may not happen every week, but at least once a month. The most recent one was yesterday. He and his girlfriend were arguing. This is what the newspaper said. This is not me making it up. He and his girlfriend were arguing. They got out of the car, right? Arguing, and they were on some kind of an incline or something, and got to arguing, and managed to fall down the incline. And I guess somebody called the hill, and somebody called up and said there's something going on here. People are out here arguing. And this was a Memphis police officer arguing, intoxicated in public, arguing with his girlfriend. Okay, well, people have domestic differences, we realize, but these are the people that are running around here supposed to be protecting the public safety. They're going to be out on the streets doing stuff they like to arrest us for sometimes. That's my thing. This is the kind of thing they'll arrest us for. But he's different. This was yesterday. And again, you can, don't believe me, you can go to the website of the Commercial Appeal. Lorenzo was reading it to me this morning. These are the kind of police officers we have in this city. And you think about that. If you've got police officers who are in public, intoxicated, arguing with, maybe their domestic partner, girlfriend, or whatever, if they're that irresponsible, and they're supposed to be protecting the public safety, you realize how dangerous that makes them. That to me is a dangerous police officer. If he's going to be, if he wants to get drunk, no problem. People get drunk. It's not against the law, but stay at home and get drunk. If you're a cop, you should be concerned about not being out in public doing it. And yet they want to lecture us about things that we do. So his was, this is the most recent example of misconduct by the police, by the police. So it's no wonder that we have 14 people dead if we got police like this, okay? Police who don't think of nothing of being intoxicated in public, and who also think nothing of, even beating each other up. One other thing I want to point out about this list, at least, probably at least 1, 2, 3, 4, probably at least 5 or 6 people on this list were shot in the back. And they were what you call so-called fleeing felons. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1983 that Tennessee's Fleeing Felon Act is unconstitutional. What that means is police and other the police, at least in Memphis, are not supposed to shoot so-called fleeing felons in the back. That is a U.S. Supreme Court ruling. And it came out of a case of a kid back in, what was that, 74, Brutality, or 15-year-old kid who was shot in the back by the police here in Memphis. It was 1974. His father went to court, filed a lawsuit, wrongful death lawsuit, and sued. And as a result of that lawsuit, the Supreme Court ruled that you can't shoot people in the back, so-called fleeing felons. So at least, probably, I know at least 6 people on this list were shot in the back, shot to death in the back. So we have the Memphis Police Department just completely disregarding a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, continuing to shoot people in the back. And that's another thing to think about when you look at this list, that they constantly violate the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. But again, no one's really saying anything about this, protesting it, contesting it. So that's what we are trying to do with, Black Autonomy Cop Watch. And that is just just a kind of an overview of this list. Kind of, we talked about it at some length yesterday. We may talk about it more. But I just want to kind of give you, those who are not from this area, kind of an overview of what is going on. So we have police who are not only corrupt and, do crazy things like get drunk in public and argue. We had a police officer here a few months ago who was off duty, was on his motorcycle, was driving recklessly apparently, and a motorist, somebody in the city saw him. He didn't know he was a cop because he was off duty. Called in to complain about him driving recklessly. So this off-duty cop finds out from dispatch the name of the citizen who had called to complain about him, and this was a violation of all their policies. This officer was not supposed to be able to get the name of the person who complained, but he got the name of the person who complained against him, called this guy up and threatened him for complaining against him. Okay, this is the kind of police that we have here. Ultimately, this guy was, he's been suspended, hasn't he? I think last I heard he was finally suspended. Now, he'll be suspended with pay. But he was driving recklessly. Somebody complains about him. He thinks because he's a cop, he can drive any way he can. And he's going to threaten people, okay? But he was never supposed to be able to get the phone number of the citizen who called to complain about him. So, that's just one more example of the kind of people we have on the police force here. So I kind of wanted to give just a kind of summary, to kind of sum up the problem that we face here, and why, in fact, we have at this point at least 14 people on this list. It's pretty hard for me to believe that they killed 3 people in just a 2-month period. But at any rate, that's the situation that we face in Memphis, and that's why we organized Black Autonomy Cop Watch. The community here, many people in the community here, there's a lot of reasons why people don't speak out against police brutality. Some people are afraid. Are the authority figures, and people who live in Memphis know how brutal the cops are here. They've been here, they know. So they're afraid. Some people believe it doesn't do any good. They're authority figures. What can we do about it? We can't organize anything to stop police brutality. So, and because people have not had any examples in recent times, the average age, we read before we moved here, the average age in Memphis is 35 years old, okay? We're senior citizens up here, but the average age was 35 years old. So within their lifetime, the people who are about 35 years old, they have not seen any real models of any kind of resistance, long-term resistance to whether it's police brutality, racism, or whatever. If you're 35 years old or younger, they don't have those models here. They don't have anything to relate to. And so on one hand, we can't get mad at them if they don't know what to do, because they haven't seen what to do, okay? There have been no models for them. And that's very sad, and it's very unfortunate. But that's just the way it is because of the demographics. You have a young adult population that makes up the vast majority of the age group in this city. And they don't have a history, so they don't know what it is that they can model. So Lorenzo has reminded me that I'm talking too long, and it is time for me now to stop. I'd like to introduce Brother Brutality. Brutality is one of our stalwart members. He is a native of Memphis. He has been involved in many movements and organizations here in Memphis, and certainly knows about previous attempts to organize against police brutality. I think one thing would be really interesting to talk about, because you were here, we were not here at this time. The police department shot a whole group of people in 1983. They called it the Shannon Street Massacre. And of course, Valley was living here, and you can speak about that.
Okay. Welcome to Memphis. I want to say that police murder is the highest level of police interaction in our community. I want to say that because the everyday normal police action is basically repression. And we have to understand that. It's repressing the community. And if we have certain things that are happening, for example, the police go up and beat up everybody in a block party or something like that, it's localized. So nobody knows what happened but the people who are there. Okay. So we have many instances of those kind of, and there are some low-level resistance sometimes, because when the police go to break up the block party, some of the people fight the police. But we don't hear about those things. We don't. It's not it's localized, and when we look at Memphis, we got to look at also Memphis has become a model for a program called Blue Crush, in which police go and concentrate, on so-called high-level crime areas, and they're assisted by the University of Memphis Anthropology Department to deal with the zip codes and all that. So, Blue Crush has a numbing effect on the black community in particular, because that's where most of the activity takes. They call it Blue Crush. And then they'll put a sign up at a house that they close down and put Blue Crush there, and to let you know that this police, we're in control of this neighborhood, we're in control of this community, and so therefore, look for us. But this is the mentality that you have on the police department in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to talk about just a couple of instances in history. That's not long history, but in 1974, the same year that the Supreme Court case went up, a young boy named Elton Hayes was driving his, Bob's truck without permission. Police, chased him, and when they got to stop him, they beat him to death. You had another young man. He was 16 years old. There was another young man with him, and the police and the sheriff deputies beat him up because they were mad because he was out feeding them throughout the city. And then he was from an area called Orange Mound, and the people of Orange Mound tried to rise up. Matter of fact, they were in the streets of Orange Mound, and the Memphis NAACP and other so-called quote-unquote preachers and leaders decide, well, we shouldn't do anything about that. We're gonna make sure stuff is going, is going to happen, that justice would be served. So they quailed, police was all in the area. They quailed the crowd at a church, in front of a church, in which they made these pronouncements. And Elton Hayes, ultimately, maybe about 10 years later, that the case came up, and and a couple of police officers, but it was about 16 police officers and sheriff deputies that were in, that participated in the beating of this young man, this young boy to death. And I want to point that out because, when the people do attempt to rise up, the numbing, not just the numbing effect of the police, but the numbing effect of the leadership, the Negro leadership, at that time we were called Negro. The Negro leadership would come and they would make promises that they would, take, and so therefore you've already quelled activity that the people are willing to participate in, and thus nothing happens. Okay, and now the most egregious in 1983 example of Memphis police force happened in January 1983 on Shannon Street, which is in North Memphis and Memphis, and across from Shannon Street School, at a house, a person was had people, they would meet, men were meeting together, black men, and they were like partying or whatever they would do. But they had one guy that, they tried to claim like he was what they call that, a person who was leading them. In other words, his name was Sanders. His last name was Sanders. And Sanders basically, would have signs on the tree in front of his house, like no pork and stuff like that, different kind of stuff. So they tried to make it like it was a cult. It shows you the disinformation that they put out. Getting the community to think that this person was a cult leader, whatever. But what happened was they would just sitting up, they would go to this man's house and they would just talk about the events of the day and drink some beer, whatever. Okay, 2 police officers came to the house looking for one person. This one person was supposed to have taken somebody's purse, snatched somebody's purse at a Kroger or something. And this was all prefabricated. When these police came in, Lamont, I got this from the witnesses that got out because there were 15 people in the house, but the house had 2 rear entrances. So when the police came, about 8 of them left out of one of the rear entrances, as the police were coming officer came in, they would have, one of them had a pistol drawn, and one of them had a big flashlight, and, what I'm told is that, Sanders tried to